Labor's outlined a vision to help close the gender pay gap between men and women in Australia. And very importantly, we're urgently committed to contributing $660 million to tackle the scourge of family violence. I'd now like to introduce Tanya Plibersek, and I congratulate her and Penny and the whole team. You know, it's exciting. If Labor wins this election on May the 18th, for the first time in the nation's history, a government will be made up of half women parliamentarians. Over to Tanya.
Well, thanks very much, Bill. It is very exciting to be here with you and with Penny and, of course, with Linda Burney to launch Labor's women's policy. This is the most comprehensive women's policy that an opposition has ever taken to an election. And it's got so many strong policies in it because of the work of shadow ministers like Linda, because of our Status of Women Committee, because of the hard work of Labor Party members all over Australia. This policy document includes a very comprehensive plan, as Bill mentioned, to tackle family violence, including extra funding for emergency accommodation, extra funding for programs to keep women and their children safely in the family home, extra funding to build 250,000 new affordable rental properties through our National Rental Affordability Scheme, extra funding for stronger legal services to assist victims and their children, stronger funding for measures to teach respectful relationships to our children in schools. It's a very comprehensive plan here to reduce and one day eliminate family violence and sexual violence in Australia. But of course, the plan goes into details in other areas as well. Economic security and independence are absolutely critical to women having real choice and control in their lives, making sure that women are paid equally to men, particularly low-paid workers in industries like childcare, making sure that their wages actually reflect the complexity and the seriousness of the work they do, making sure that women are better paid in their retirement by reducing the superannuation pay gap. Of course, we have policies throughout this plan for women's health as well. We've got a very strong focus on sexual and reproductive health in this women's plan too. So I'm very proud of what we've included in the plan. It is very comprehensive. There will be a few extra policies that we announce in coming weeks as well, particularly in the area of low-paid workers' wages, that will very much assist women workers. I think when you look at this plan, you see the great policy work that's been done, and one of the reasons that we've been able to do it is because we have incredibly strong representation of women in our parliamentary Labor Party and in the Labor Party generally, and you can't really help but draw a contrast between Labor on track to meet our 50-50 target 6 years ahead of schedule and Scott Morrison, who, when a quarter of the female members in his parliamentary team told him that there's a culture problem, that there's a bullying problem within the Parliamentary Liberal Party, said nothing to see here and refused to address it. And the Liberals are actually on track to have fewer women in the House of Representatives than there will be men named Andrew in the House of Representatives after the next election. Michael McCormack, when asked whether the Nationals had a women problem, said no, both our women are ministers. Both, only two. So the reason Labor's able to do so well in these policies is, of course, Bill's leadership and commitment to the issue, but also the fact that the modern Labor Party actually represents modern Australia because of our gender makeup. We're able to pay for these policies because we've made tough decisions when it comes to many of the savings that we've found, and we've prioritised investing in better services for victims of domestic violence, for closing the gender pay gap, closing the superannuation pay gap, making sure that low-paid workers are better paid. We've prioritised that over tax cuts for the top end of town. What you know for certain is that when you're contrasting Labor and the Liberal Party is looking backwards. They're stuck in the past. They've got people like the candidate for Macnamara who refuses to apologise for saying that women who are childless wouldn't make good members of Parliament because they lack the necessary empathy. You've got a Prime Minister that refuses to admit that there's a bullying or a culture problem within the Liberal Party when it comes to women, and refuses to pull into line a candidate like this with such old-fashioned views. Whether it's women's policy, whether it's climate change, whether it's marriage equality, the Liberals are stuck in the past.
Thanks, Tanya. Are there any questions on today's policy launch or any other matters?
Mr. Sean, just while we're on the topic of expressing views about women, one of your NT Senate candidates has posted a few comments to social media that have been framed as vulgar around Natasha Griggs and Emma Alberici. Will you disendorse him from the Labor team?
Listen, I only found out about this overnight. I think he has been incredibly stupid. He's not running in a winnable spot, but we've told him to take that. I understand the party has told him to take it down and to apologise straight away. Sorry, Dan.
You've been offered debates by the ABC and Channel 9. Both of those debates being played on those channels, the main channels, on the free-to-air stations. Instead, you're on 7-2 and Sky News with fewer people watching. Why have you not accepted the I'll vote for a debate.
Let me be the healer. First of all, on the debates, we do have two scheduled. I'm really pleased that I'm going to Western Australia to do the debate. They haven't had a big debate like this before. It's been a little bit of negotiation to get it right, but I think we're there. We've got another debate scheduled with Sky in Brisbane. We've got two debates. Let's see how they go. I'm open to doing more, but I also would just note that this sudden belated interest in the Liberal Party in debating us. These people have invented the part-time parliament. I'm not even talking about the member for Manila. We had 7 sitting days in 8 months. I mean, if Mr Morrison wants to spend a lot of time listening to me, you can always vote for me. But actually on the debates, there is another point, now you come to mention it. Why on earth is this government hiding all of its ministers? I'm up for debates with Mr Morrison. We've got 2 scheduled already. But gee whiz, they're hard to find some of these government ministers, aren't they? We should almost set a little prize. Where on earth is Melissa Price? Environment, climate change. We can't get a debate there. Industrial relations, wages policy, the issue that dare not speak its name in coalition ranks. How about a debate on workplace relations? And how about that hoary old chestnut for the government, a National Integrity Commission? Surprise, surprise. Does this government want its Attorney General to debate our shadow Attorney General? No way. I mean, with all of the scandals engulfing this government, from Paladin to Manus to Hello World to goodness knows what's gone on with Eastern Agriculture, no wonder Mr Morrison is keeping many of his ministers in witness protection because he's too embarrassed by them or too afraid of what they might say. Sorry, you're next. Sorry. You'll be next, Olivia.
If you are so confident in your agenda, why haven't you rejected these debates in front of these mass national audiences?
Well, we haven't rejected them, but first of all, we've got 2 scheduled. And secondly, let's get a few of those shadow ministers out and a few of the government ministers out, and we're certainly open to do it. The other thing is, let's see how the government goes answering questions in these 2 debates, and if they're good affairs, then we're happy to do more of them. Sorry, I said you were next, Liv. Sorry, I just... Well.
You took part in 4 at the last election.
3. I was there. No, there was a Facebook one, which... Of course, who was I debating then? Malcolm Turnbull.
You took part in more than 2 at the last election. Will you not commit to doing more than that at this time round? And if not, what has changed?
Well, first of all, that was an 8-week election, and we fit 3 in. This is a 5-week election. We've committed to 2, and again, let me just say, very open. I mean, it'll be a bit of an arm wrestle between Channel 9 and the ABC for the 3rd one. But the point about it is, where are Mr Morrison's ministers? Yes. Mr Morrison wants to say it's just about him and me. That's fine, I'll debate him. But the point about it is, it's also about the policies. The biggest issues in Australia at the moment, wages, everything's going up except your wages, but can we get the minister in charge of wages policy? No. And climate change, why on earth? Where's this Melissa Price? She goes from success story to success story, doesn't she? I mean, we've just found out about a uranium mine, miraculously approved, in the teeth of a West Australian state court hearing, the day before an election. What a coincidence. Sorry, yeah.
Mr. Children, the Workplace Gender Equality Agency says that the pay gap's going to persist in Australia into the late 2060s. You talked about the lower end of the spectrum. Can you force big business to close its pay gaps in Australia?
I'll get some of my shadows here to add to this. Yes, we can. What will guarantee the pay equity gap persisting for the next 50 years is if you vote for Scott Morrison at the next election. We've got fair income policies. We're going to announce some more on Sunday. We are about closing the gap. Whatever improvements have been made in the last 6 years is because no wages have risen. But the point about it is we are going to say to our big business, don't hide behind pay secrecy contracts anymore. We want to see what you're paying the men in your organisation and the women. And if you're not paying them the same, why not? If not, why not? We're going to make a requirement of our procurement. We want to see what actually is happening for companies bidding for Commonwealth work. Why should a company who pays its men and women equally be at a financial disadvantage to a company who doesn't when they're bidding for Commonwealth work?
Those two they're not going to close the pay gap on their own.
Well, you should try them.
Party's preference.
So I actually did say that my colleagues might talk a little more about that.
I think you answered it really well, Bill. It is the changes that we made to the Workplace Gender Equality Act and agency last time have been responsible for a slight narrowing of the gender pay gap, but the real impact has been men's wages falling. We can't reduce the gender pay gap by undermining the growth in men's wages. We want to see men and women's wages growing strongly. So measures like banning pay secrecy clauses, so you can choose to disclose or not disclose your pay to your colleagues, your union and others are really important. Making sure that companies are transparent and publishing their gender pay gap. Very large companies will be forced to disclose their gender pay gap and show what plans they have to reduce the gender pay gap. These measures are making a difference overseas, and we believe they'll make a significant difference here.
Sorry, someone did ask me a question before about the uranium mine. I just wanted to say on that, this is yet again looking like another shonky deal by this government. And a pretty big decision, a lot of money at stake, made in the dead of night, the day before the election's called miraculously straight after. It's apparently the most important decision the government had to make before it immediately called an election to go to the Australian people. There are questions for this government to answer here. Yet again, though, why on earth do we have the minister who's doing the approvals in hiding? It is a legitimate question for you to ask the Prime Minister. Why is it that on everything from climate change to the approval of this uranium mine, that the minister involved just can't be found?
On national security, the Prime Minister today has accused Labor of continually dragging its feet on national security legislation, including over foreign fighters. Are the days of bipartisan support in this area dead?
Oh, listen, this bloke should be ashamed of himself, playing political games, especially in the shadow of the shocking Sri Lanka murders. He should be ashamed of himself. He loves to be on the high ground, this Prime Minister, but he never fails to reach to the bottom of the barrel when it suits him. I'll get Penny to explain why this Prime Minister should be ashamed of himself.
Thanks very much. Well, can I just say this? Bill's right, he should be ashamed of himself. He knows we have given bipartisan support to national security legislation over and over again. And we have ensured bipartisan support under Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull, but the only Prime Minister, Liberal Prime Minister in that series who wants to open up a political divide on national security has been Scott Morrison. I'm on that committee, and as Senate Leader, I've ensured with our party that we have given not only bipartisan support but prompt passage. Now, the particular legislation in place was the subject of a unanimous agreement from the Intelligence Committee and was not presented to the part-time Parliament of Mr Morrison. He should be ashamed of himself for playing politics.
Hang on, let's be civilised here. Sorry.
Several commentators have said that the PM has outperformed you in the first couple of weeks. Mr Morrison himself has called you a cranky bear today. Can I ask you how you would rate your performance in the first couple of weeks?
I'm proud of our team and I'm proud of our policies. Come on. I know you want me to speed up my answers, but 4 words. Jackie. Okay, we're putting forward proper policies. Let's tell the truth for the first 2 weeks. This government doesn't talk about you or the people. They've got no plan. They don't talk about climate change. They've spent 1 day on health and said that's all they're going to say on health. Even though the out-of-pocket costs are going up, they have no plan to match our proposition to help cancer patients, for example. On TAFE today, they're offering $60 million. Let me give you a couple of simple numbers. 150,000 people less are doing apprenticeships now than 6 years ago. $3 billion worth of cuts in vocational education, and they offer $60 million. This is a government who just hopes the people have got a short memory. They have nothing positive to say about Australia. The reason why we're doing a women's policy launch today is because we are excited by what we can do for Australian women and the Australian people. The reason why we are so committed to investing, for example, in helping people in Medicare with the greatest expansion, with their helping with their costs of cancers, we've got a vision for the future. I guarantee you, all that Mr Morrison can say is yell out, liar, liar. That's all he can do. You guys should keep account every time he says it. He's been bottle-fed by a focus group to say if you just keep attacking Bill, then somehow they'll make you forget their disunity and chaos. I mean, what is shameful about this fellow is he's always up on the hill giving the preaching lecture, isn't he? He's always saying, you know, I'm such a good fellow, but then he reaches to the bottom of the barrel. He's tried to confuse people and say we're taking their utes, which we're not. He's tried to say that we're introducing a death tax, which we're not. He's tried to say somehow that we delayed security legislation, when in fact we had a unanimous position, so he's wrong on that. I mean, this fellow knows that the only chance they have is to totally talk about me and not talk about their own policies and to scare people about the future. This election, I believe, in the first 2 weeks, has shown two diametrically different paths. One path is the low road. Just nothing good to say about anyone, every excuse in the world about everything, why he can't do something, and now we find out he's cozying up to the extremists in the Senate, cozying up to, you know, Mr Palmer, who owes the taxpayer $67 million, whereas what we've chosen to do, sure, we've got our tough things to say on them, but we're also saying what we're going to do for the people. We've got a wages policy, they don't. We've got a climate change policy, they don't. We've got a policy to provide the equal treatment of women, they don't. We've got a vocational training policy to make sure that we fix up all the mess they've made, they don't. And we've got a policy, in fact, to make sure that we can help our health system with the best expansion in a generation. So, yeah, it'll be up to the judgment of the people, and that's what we're going to focus on. Sorry, someone who hasn't had a go. James?
Mr. John, can I follow up on Dan's question? This Senate candidate, Mr. Gore North, in the Northern Territory, not only has he posted this image with Ms Alvaricci, but he's also made comments seemingly disparaging and derogatory of Natasha Griggs in 2015. Is it enough to tell him to take down that Alvaricci post when he's made previous comments like this in the past? Should he be dismissed?
Let me know how you go with Morrison and what his candidate for McNamara has said about people close to me, all right? So let's not start giving the lecture here. I've said this bloke is incredibly stupid. Has Morrison said that the candidate for McNamara is incredibly stupid, which she is? Has Morrison actually set a standard for his own candidates that he's setting for ours? I understand this bloke shouldn't have said it. He's number 4 on the Senate ticket, not running in a marginal seat like McNamara, but that doesn't excuse it. Stupid conduct is stupid conduct, we call it. And by the way, if you want to talk about who you're supporting and who you're not supporting, why on earth is he putting an out-and-out crackpot like Fraser Anning in the seat of Capricornia ahead of Labor? Why on earth is he preferencing One Nation with that person in the Hunter Valley? You know, seriously. If you want to talk about quality control in political parties, have a look at the Palmer United Party, have a look at the One Nation Party, have a look at the Liberal Party. Sorry, your turn.
Will you extend industry bargaining rights beyond motor vehicle workers?
We know that the bargaining system is not working as it should, but I'm not convinced that we need to have, you know, everyone going into industry bargaining. What we think of our wages policy is very straightforward. Reverse the penalty rate cuts, pay equity for women, and we're going to have more to say on that very soon. We want to shut down sham contracting. We want to make sure that enterprise bargaining is fairer, and we want to have a living wage, and we want to reform labour hire. Mark? Mark?
Could you just clear up the situation with Clive Palmer? You said a couple of things about him in this press conference. Did Michael O'Connor or anybody else negotiate with Clive Palmer on your behalf to share preferences with Labor?
No. And, you know, in elections, I'm sure there's plenty of conversations go on. There have been no formal negotiations, and furthermore, let's go to the heart of the matter why we think Mr Morrison's made such a dreadful error of judgment here. The reality is that in 2016, Queensland Nickel, of which Mr Palmer has a great interest, went into administration. That was the beginning of the year. What happened then is that workers were left with entitlements. We understand, I'm not even talking about all the creditors, small businesses, of about $74 million. What then happened is that under the law of the land, where workers are out of pocket, the Commonwealth steps in with a safety net payment, and then the Commonwealth seeks repayment from the company which has gone belly up. And Mr Morrison was the Treasurer who in about April 2016 authorised the payment of about $67 million to the workers from the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth stands in the shoes of the workers to seek recovery from Queensland Nickel. Now, I think that it is actually beyond a joke that on one hand you've got a businessman running around spending $30 million, and some of it in your own organisations, of advertising your own organisations. He's found $30 million to put his own head all over Australia in those billboards. The government has done a deal with him. Only one leader in Australia has done a deal with Mr Palmer. And now, this government, what is their plan? What have they promised, Palmer? Because I tell you, when you deal with Palmer, the idea that it's just a non-exchange arrangement with Clive Palmer would be the first time in human history. And then what is the detail? What is Mr Morrison doing to recover the money that taxpayers are owed by Queensland Nickel? And it would have been a precondition for us to go to the heart of the matter. It's a deal breaker for Labor to have a businessman and try and seek and do a deal on their preferences without sorting out the money owed to the taxpayer and to the workers. Jack.
A photographer at a media event today for a Fraser Anning candidate was allegedly punched by someone who is apparently a supporter of the party. What do you make of these?
Oh, I don't know anything about that at all. And I just think, I don't know anything about it. Violence completely unacceptable. Last question. Olivia, last question.
On Clive Palmer, can you then, therefore, rule out doing any deal with his party to pass legislation through the Senate if you're elected?
Well, my aim is to get as many of our people elected first. I do think that Mr Morrison, as the current Prime Minister, should explain how he's going to recover the money owed to the taxpayers. At the end of the day, it's not about Mr Morrison, Clive Palmer or myself. It's about whether or not you think it's appropriate for a major political party to enter into a self-serving deal but at the same time see taxpayers out of pocket for $67 million. This is the chaos of the government. You know, someone asked earlier about the election of the last 2 weeks. One thing's clear. This government is increasingly desperate. The fact that they won't stop the Nationals, their coalition partners, their bosom buddies, from doing a deal with One Nation shows their desperation. The fact that you've got coalition members of Parliament preferencing Fraser Anning very high up the ticket after all of what he has said. The fact that you've got a Prime Minister of Australia up on the high moral ground, always saying, you know, how good they are, but reaching to the bottom of the barrel with a Palmer deal. Never forget what happened last time Palmer got elected. Never forget. And, you know, 4 senators, 3 political parties, the chaos of those years. Listen, I might finish up. Penny Wong's had to serve in the Senate and seen what happens when the Liberals and Nationals cosy up to the extreme right and the desperate and dateless of the far right. And I think that we should hear from Penny about what happened.
Just very briefly, I think we all know that Clive got a lot of people elected to the Senate. He had 3 people elected to the Senate, plus himself to the House, and then just 2 short years later, we had 3 different political parties that we had to deal with in the Senate. Bill just said Clive is desperate and dateless. What I'd say is this, in addition to that, this is a marriage of convenience between an ad man and a con man. That's what Scott Morrison is offering the Australian people. That's what Scott Morrison is offering the Australian people. And I'd make this other point. What this really shows is Scott Morrison's desperation. Does anybody in this room believe you can actually govern with Clive Palmer? Do any of you believe that? Scott Morrison doesn't believe that. But he's so desperate to cling on to power, he'll do a deal with Clive Palmer even though he knows he can't govern with him. And you know what that means, ladies and gentlemen? What it means is more of the same, more chaos and division. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thanks.